Welcome to Conversations with Chuck Bennington. I'm Chuck Bennington, and I don't know it all, and I don't pretend to, but I do know that I love my son, and I want him to have a better, faster, smoother journey through the trials and tribulations of life than I had myself. So here's my documented journey, stories, lessons, and experiences that are really for you, buddy. I love you.
Welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Chuck. Here I am with one of my favorite humans on the planet, Mr. Chuck Bennington, for our bi-weekly chat. How are you this morning?
I am doing very well.
That's awesome.
Sun is out. We've had a ton of rain lately, which is not always the case. So, for frame of reference, it's September 1st and coming out of July and August in Tejas. It
Yes.
is usually just dry, like bone dry,
Mm.
dead ass grass everywhere. Actually, last night when we were driving south on 183, I looked out the right hand side of the window past my lovely wife, who was doing something very important on her phone. Um, and
Creating
I
a reel, no
saw
doubt.
some trees with just dark brown and amber rust colored leaves, and I was like, wow, this change in the weather has really brought the change of the leaves and the
Mm.
seasons in quickly. And then as soon as I had the thought in my head before I said anything out loud, I was like, oh, it's a dead tree, stupid. uh,
Yeah.
a week and a half
Pump
of
the
rain
brakes.
doesn't save 4
No,
months of it being dry. Anyway,
beep.
yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good. Nice,
That's
nice
good.
weather makes it nice for me. I didn't realize that I was as sensitive to sunlight and exposure as I am. Knowing what I know now, supplemental vitamin D would have been great when I was up in Washington State going through my first winter and fall after having grown up in literally the Sunshine State.
Yeah, literally.
And I was a down and out, miserable, grouchy bastard. And I felt very anxious and
Mm.
depressed. And I
Turns
think a
out,
little vitamin D supplementation really would have done fucking wonders.
just
But
just kicked in a little bit.
you know what
Yeah,
you know
we've
when you know it.
when and it's funny here. We've kicked over to spring, and it's like instantly our air temperature is warmer. I think last night I just had one sheet to cover me, no blankets, no nothing. Instantly in like an overnight flip. It's ridiculous. We just have two seasons. It's either cold or hot, and then
Yeah.
that's it. There's no transition for us. It's just straight away. So no, well, winter's over now, and I'm very sad about that. I'm the opposite. I prefer the winter than the sun. But I don't know how it'd go if it was
I
dark and cold and
Vanessa and I
snowing.
were talking this morning about, bigger life goals, kind of 10-year plan, 5 to 10-year time horizon. And after we get into our next house, then the next acquisition will be just an investment property. And then the
Mm.
acquisition after that will be a second home in the mountains somewhere for us to be during the summer when it's just too damn hot.
Yeah.
Maybe a part of the fall while it's super pretty.
Yeah.
But
Nice.
anyway, like, fuck it. It it's nice to have big goals, even if they don't come true, to at least have something to work for in the future. It's
Ex
easier to move forward. Rebellions are built on hope. I say that all the time on coaching calls.
and it is, and I think it's good to have something to occupy your brain, like when you feel like everything's too hard or too much or not going to plan, you've got this thing that's your shining light that your brain can go focus on and go, "Oh, yeah, we're working towards the house in the mountains." It makes you feel like that there's even when you feel like there's no purpose to what you're doing, then there's that little bit of purpose, regardless whether you get there or not. Your brain still wants to think about it, and it gives you that little push forward, a little bit of momentum.
There's a we could talk at length
Oh,
on that, and
we
maybe
could.
I'll bring that in relevant to whatever it is that you think you'd like to talk us through in this journey today for me to learn about
Well,
my own shit and maybe help
other people.
someone other than myself. I fucking dude, I'm gonna be so you know what? No, I need to that's a good thing to think about. I was gonna say I'm gonna be so bummed if Liam has no desire to listen to any of this at all. I was thinking about it with Joe Rogan and not
Yeah.
making any type of comparison with that,
Mm.
but he talks about his kids on the podcast fairly regularly. And I
Mm.
wonder how much of the podcast the kids listen to or are exposed to But what
Yeah.
a fucking daunting, insurmountable task when they get to adult
Oh,
age. The guy's at like 17 or 1800 right now. And so by
yeah.
the time they tack on another handful of years, it'll be like, so Rogan episodes are like 2 to 3 hours. He'll have 5 or 6,000. I'm not Rain Man, but that's like upwards of
That's a lot.
18,000 hours minimum. That's crazy. Anyway,
I think
that's
they'd
not what we
probably
wanted to talk about.
they might go and get the Blinkist, like, abbreviated version and just get the cliff notes for it.
He'll have to, you know what? That'll be your opus. That'll be
Yeah,
you set up as a mindset coach to do a separate Joe Rogan podcast to distill with him what
yeah,
lessons he learned in a decade of doing the Joe Rogan podcast
but
to pass on to his kids.
yeah. We've got some experience in the field. Um, well, today I thought, the whole concept of the the podcast is you talking about, your thoughts on life, observations, experiences, to share with Liam primarily and your dad, and to leave that legacy. And a lot of the stuff that we've covered, and I've had this feedback from people who listen, because you've got listeners now, is about that amazing openness and vulnerability that you've had. And a lot of people don't like talking about vulnerability. So I thought I'd throw it up there today in regard to that's uncomfortable, or that people have a perception if they're vulnerable, then it's they're, weak, or they're, exposed.
Ooh, this
Whereas
is a good one.
and I thought it was a powerful one, because for both you and I, as not that I'm stealing your show, but as coaches,
It's
the
our
best
show. We
it's
can
our
say
show.
that out loud. It's our show because it
So,
really honestly would not exist without you.
oh,
And
you're
you
too
hold me
kind.
accountable and you make these things happen. You ask deep, interesting questions. And
It's
no, dude,
it's easy. It's easy. But as coaches, it took me a long time
vulnerability
to
is a
learn.
mind fuck for coaches because
Oh,
most of them are so incredibly insecure. And so I speak to this from my own experience and my own lens. And so anything I'm saying about coaches is my own experience and frame of reference as a coach, as a clarifier. I don't pretend to know about everybody's like shit and situations, but I've gone through enough of these conversations, enough time with enough people that I've got some pretty fucking educated guesses, my friend. Now, vulnerability I see as being really difficult for coaches because they are trying to operate from a place of what they would expect the perception of security and competence to be rather than what it actually is.
mm,
And so it's really interesting as a social construct. Oh, this is so good. I love this because I'm thinking about it as we go.
mm,
We are regularly exposed in art, stories, music, movies, fucking everything to these characters that become idolized influences of really what we aspire to be as coaches, right? Like it would be
mm.
somebody in a parent role, a leader role, a coach role, it could be fucking Mel Gibson in Braveheart, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, in all of the stories that I can bring to mind quickly offhand without doing a deep exploration, the hero, the protagonist, ends up extremely fucking pants down in the character development, in the bonding, and in the association because our weaknesses show us our strengths, our mess is our message, our struggles, our story. There's like a million little snippets that you could riff on about that, but I don't know where we build this false construct that our vulnerability is a weakness because at least as I think through it, I think most of us have almost nothing besides examples to the contrary outside of maybe late childhood, early adolescence, very early
Mm,
adulthood, maybe early adulthood if you have like a shitty network of people and friends. And so
yeah.
maybe that is where, like, despite all evidence to the contrary, and if you can think about anybody that you've ever been deeply connected and bonded to, there was an element of vulnerability and weakness that exposed them because it helped
Mm,
humanize them and create empathy. I mean, that's like a big part of why I make it so deliberate in my interactions and my coaching because I know what it's like to feel like you need to hide behind that wall, and life is way better on the other side of it. And so, like, help me help you, and we can both come in, and it's just so much easier for us to connect as humans.
Yep.
But I think that maybe like family trauma and just coming of age trauma is probably
Hmm.
enough to write a story that sticks with most people for the rest of their life, or at least that's what I'm thinking about it like in this moment
Yeah.
right now.
And I agree. I think it is. And I know for myself, when I started my coaching journey in the affiliate, it was like you have a perception that you need to be like, 10 foot high and bulletproof, all seeing, all knowing, because you're supposed to be the leader rather than saying, well, actually, I don't have my shit together either. And as I evolved and learnt about that, and really it was only towards the tail end of that journey, being able to understand that having that vulnerability means that people will have that back with you. Therefore, you can have those deeper relationships and connections with those people and have better outcomes and better conversations and more meaningful interactions rather than squats, burpees, thrusters, go faster, do better.
Yeah, that's I mean, the benefits are fairly obvious, or at least I would think. And maybe that's the first thing to really tackle is if this is intended to be how I got where I am because I wasn't always in this place, but also if I had to collapse time, how could I do it better sooner?
Mm,
I think begin with why. I know that's like try it, but like why would it matter to have more uncomfortable conversations?
mm.
Because if you can't align some type of reason or benefit to that, like, fuck no, nobody wants to do it. Nobody's like,
No.
I can't wait to expose all of my insecurities, fears, and vulnerabilities. This will be
Yeah,
awesome because I didn't know that it was bad enough when it was only in my head. And
yeah,
maybe this is doubly true if we think about adolescent references. And you're like, no, dude, the locker room fucking sucked as is. Base level, locker room was hell.
yep,
At least that was my experience in it. But man, if I had to let everybody know how insecure I was, if I had to let everybody know everything that I was afraid of or worried about, I would venture to guess that the social conditioning that is probably necessary for evolution at that point wouldn't have let that be like the bonding
no,
moment it gets to be as an adult. So that's important to realize
no,
is that is important to realize as I say it out loud to myself.
mm,
We curate conversations in a very different manner as adults, or at least we have the ability to,
yes,
because we are no longer trapped in someone else's constructs of boundaries, both like structural and social.
yep. And we
Like,
don't,
fucking, if you hate somebody in fourth grade math class, like, well, tough titty, said the kitty.
yeah,
'Cause you're fucking stuck there, so the milk's not bad.
yeah,
But like you have to get over it. But in adult life, you're like, nope.
yep,
We can
just,
dissolve a business relationship. We can get divorced. Like we can fucking move apart from each other. We can just
mm,
decide that like this isn't a good, interaction, like lose my number, or it could just be like, hey, we're not a good fit to work together. Or you just
yep,
know in a conversation that like, we don't vibe together, so we're not gonna try to tribe together.
yeah, and you can be very arbitrary about that. But I think when you're younger, a lot of those decisions are made for you. It's like, you're told that you have to get along with everybody and,
Well, we
that.
still end up, and maybe that's it, is early on, everybody has a high amount of leverage because social credit's the only thing that you have.
Yep.
And it can sway negatively very quickly. But
Mm,
in adult life, most people don't have proportional leverage to the discomfort that you fear or perceive in that situation. But if you can even wrap your head around that, those probably still remain for all of us. The conversations and the relationships that it is hard to really like pull your heart out, put it on your sleeve, and be like, hey, this is what I'm struggling with
mm,
because there's still some loss aversion or opportunity cost. There is still leverage in the relationship. And so maybe that's, as I say this out loud to myself, maybe that's the thing to be able to look for and address, whether that's actually looking for and addressing with the other person so that you're on an equal playing field, or if you just
mm,
find a way to change the frame in your mind where you're like, I don't need this person, this situation, or this thing as much as I perceive that I do. We both need each other if this thing is to carry forward. And
Mm,
if we can't get into a place where there's not disproportionate leverage in the relationship, so there can be equal reciprocity, and if we can't get comfortable having hard conversations, then like we probably have the answer that this thing doesn't need to exist at all.
mm. And the power
Look at
is in
that. It
those hard
sounds like I know a
conversations.
fucking thing or two, even when I'm
It
really
does.
just kind of rambling.
But 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 that's the power of our conversations is that some of the times I've had the biggest realizations that, maybe I'm not just full of shit is when I'm having a conversation and theory revolves, it comes in, you're like, "Oh, I actually understand, this concept really, really
That was
well
like
without."
episode 1, like the prequel. It's that we don't appreciate that being able to talk out loud through our ideas is part of how
Mm.
we understand what the fuck we're even thinking.
Yeah, because everything makes sense up here is when you verbalize it and you go, "Oh," like you were just saying before we jumped on about a story you had you last night, you were driving in the car and in your brain you're like, "Oh, look, the season's changing, that tree is brown and all." And then your brain, before you verbalize it, filters it, went, "No, it's actually dead tree," like, but it wouldn't have been until you actually, 9 times out of 10 to actually put that out there that you go, "Actually, I know where I'm wrong in my, supposition
Ooh,
there," and
ooh. Um, I I would have anybody that listens to this consider compounding.
mm,
It's like compounding is the eighth wonder of the world, right? That a penny doubled every day starts out as a whole lot of fucking nothing and is predominantly a whole lot of nothing until you get into like the late 20s of the days and then
mm,
weird magical shit happens. But what I'm thinking about is, oh, this is so cool because I've got examples to pull from in my own real life is if these things and we can stay with that tree because it's simple. And
mm,
so if we didn't get that
mm.
on the I don't know if that was before when we started recording.
No, it was, yeah, before we recorded.
Oh yeah, you asked me how I was doing.
Yeah,
So I'm doing
yeah.
well. It's rainy, but the weather's nice today, and so we had rain a lot the last week and a half. And Vanessa and I were driving south last night, and I peered out of my window and saw some dark amber rust autumn type colors on a tree as we drove past. And I was thinking, wow, this cooler weather and rain has really ushered in the fall quicker than expected. And then before the words even left my mouth, my brain was like, no, stupid. Because you're thinking about having to say this out loud, now you have to think about it and you can just realize that, like, oh, yeah, it's a dead tree because it's only been raining for like a week and a half and it's been dry for 4 months and it's only
Yeah,
September 1st. It's not fall.
yeah,
But had I just let it be a thought in my head, it would have ended right there. It would have been like, huh, look at that. Fall's starting early.
yeah,
And I think most people could probably associate with that is often the case. And so where I was going with this is think about how that's compounded and magnified over time when
mm,
you look at our own false perceptions, when you look at the things that we think are true that we don't even know what we actually think about.
yeah,
And so where I'm looking at this is in like an evidentiary way,
mm,
when you're younger, especially in like that adolescent and early adulthood stage, everything is on very shaky ground and you're quick to change thoughts, beliefs, viewpoints, frameworks, mental models.
mhm.
But man, have you tried to get somebody in their 70s or 80s to think about a thing a different kind of way?
Yeah, no.
Varying degrees of success, right? But
Yeah,
within one 30-minute car ride with your fucking mates when you're 16, you guys could flop political parties like 100 times.
yeah,
And as an
yeah,
adult, you're like, it's an entirely fucking terrible system. Nothing is binary within
yeah,
reason. And so, anyway, that's just interesting to think about. And so, I'm glad that I have the opportunity to have conversations like this.
and, I was just reflecting that, I think the first time I really had open conversations about, being vulnerable and things that, I didn't know or wasn't good at or couldn't construct was when I started my coaching relationship with you and Tony.
Cool. I'm
Because
super interested on this. Oh, this is fucking cool. Oh, I say cool a lot, and I need to
yeah,
build some like better awareness around that. Or maybe I don't. Fuck it. Who gives a
no, I
shit?
really like it.
Uh,
But,
had you gone to any appreciable amount of therapy and counseling prior to that coaching relationship?
no, it started after that
Okay,
relationship. Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
I wasn't sure because well, anyway, go back into your story and then you can ask me
yeah.
why I gave a shit about that or why that was
So,
interesting to me.
that was the first time, like, I'd really had people ask me questions about, me, and then stop and just wait for, something to come in that space, and I could give an answer, and they're like you guys were like, "Yeah, cool, but that's not the answer. We know that you're dancing around," and eventually you would, if I didn't get there, sort of just bring it up directly. It's like, well, if you didn't bring it up, we were going to bring it up, and there are so many things that you guys saw in me early on that I didn't realize was apparent. And you're like, yeah, we've been thinking this for a while, but cool, glad you finally got there. But I hadn't had such open and conversations where it was okay to admit like you felt like a failure or were struggling or not being a good human or could have done things better, and it was really an empowering thing for me. And I got used to being in that uncomfortable space. I actually look forward to those conversations then where I never had, but because of the way that you and Tony would, that reciprocity that we talk about, like there were times on the call where everyone had a tear in their eye kind of thing, and so I
Yeah.
didn't feel like I was just on the mat and just, being dragged through the mud in this process. Like, I felt that that was that shared, space, so we were on that level playing field, even though you guys had not shared very much about yourselves, but because you were in my story with me at that time, that it felt like, "Okay, we're all in this little space together right now, and they get it, and they hear me and see me." So why did you give a shit about that? I guess that I've raised this.
Um, so have you found that so you mentioned that you didn't know very much about us, which us
Mm,
implies more than one. So like you didn't
yeah.
know very much about me
Mm,
until we began this process of kind of documenting my journey, my thoughts, my ideas, and just having deeper conversations regularly that weren't
mm,
centered on Lisa and Lisa's gym and then Lisa's fitness business. Right.
mm,
Do you see where there was a bunch of ample opportunity for alignment in empathy and connection? Like knowing what you know now
yep,
about me, you're like, oh yeah, like
yep,
fuck. There was a mutual shared sense of this dude understands what I'm struggling with, even though I don't know what his frame of reference is.
yes. Yeah, it was really clear.
And so where this is powerful and useful is labeling emotions to build
Mm,
associations, whether it's
mm,
for ourselves or other people. So you can think back to a lot of the earlier stuff before we really had like a deeper connection and deeper coach client relationship to where we could identify stuff and be like, you're doing the thing again, aren't you? And you're like, son of a bitch, it's me.
You
That's
got me.
later in the game. But initially, you have to build a little bit of awareness. And so the situations and circumstances change, but the feelings that we get from things generally don't, as long as they lump
Mm,
in the same category. So early on,
mm,
how does that make you feel? How does that make you feel? How does that
mm.
make you feel? That is really repetitive because as coaching development, human development, like relationship shit, I don't know. Maybe I don't need to give qualifiers for any of this anymore. I'm just used to shooting like short form stuff for social media. It's a habit loop.
Yeah,
Everything's
it
a
is.
fucking skill. So I could do better at this skill. And now I'm on a tangent. But when you're thinking about being able to bridge gaps in communication relationships, being able to get on the same page with the emotion
Mm,
is what precedes the ability to do anything with the logic and reason.
yep.
Emotion is also what creates an impetus for action, right? Like the
Mhm,
crystallization of discontent. It's because it feels fucking some kind of way that
yep,
all of the logical and rational shit that you've had in your brain the whole time, you finally do
yep.
something with. Even if it is illogical and irrational, you at least take action because your level of emotion is raised to a point. So, anyway,
Mm,
if we can label emotions, then we can build associations either for ourselves to be like, hey, what are all the things that I think are unrelated, but because I'm the constant in all of my problems, what are all the things that make me feel
mm,
anger? What are all the things that make me feel anxiety? What are all the things that make me feel a lack of competence or lack of belief? okay,
Mm.
now I can actually start solving these things in a way that is productive. Um,
Yeah.
so that's helpful for us in our own journey and story, but also in connecting to the other characters and actors, right? Because if I know
Mm.
that you doing this thing in a gym, some kind of way, or whatever happens in your life
Mm.
makes you feel, I don't know, give me a couple emotions.
Like, just, anxious, stressed.
Isn't it interesting how all we've done is list negative things?
Yeah, it's not
Mind fuck,
happy or
right?
yeah, right.
So let's use something on the other side because I think it's like equally powerful, or even
Mm.
probably more so powerful. It is more powerful because we share suffering more universally.
Mm.
So it's more powerful if we can align something that sits closer to heaven, mana, nirvana, like the good shit.
Yeah.
I would venture to guess you don't know what it's like to have a son, correct?
Correct.
So
Correct.
that's a hard area of like happiness for me to try to explain to you, and it makes it ineffable beyond
Yep.
words. That's a way
Yep.
too like complex
Yep.
linguistically of a word that I like to use because I don't know another word that gets the point across.
Yep.
Ineffable means that the thing is beyond words. And so
Yep.
it's a cool word. You should know that. Words are important.
Yeah.
Speaking is spelling, abracadabra. We could do a whole fucking thing on words. Anyway, now I've slightly lost my train of thought.
Back to having a son and
Get me back there.
not
Right. Okay. So yeah, it's
how
beyond
happy
words.
it
That's
makes
why I
you.
couldn't
Yeah.
think of what I was going to say because there's nothing to say.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how awesome any experience has been in your life. It's not that my experience as a father is better. It's that it's so much different that there isn't a way to effectively connect the dots.
Yep.
We use the example of fitness conversations tied to cars because that's a pretty universal construct that most people have a sense of what driving a Lamborghini or a Ferrari would probably be like.
Mm.
I've been lucky enough to do those things. Fucking super high fives. I'm better than the average bear with words, I would guess.
Yep.
But despite that, I'll never be able to remotely adequately convey any of the experience at all, especially because it's also framed through my value structure. For
Mm.
me, driving Lamborghinis and Ferraris on a racetrack is like up here, and you might be like, that terrifies me. I want
Yeah.
no part of that. 0% fucking fun, bro.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's a stupid thing to try to connect the dots to, not only because you don't even have any remotely similar shared experience, but because we're
Mm.
making such a discrepancy in like the values. And so, if we can figure out what do you feel? What do you feel? How does it make you feel? How did that make
Mm.
you feel? Then we can look at what are kind of the ebbs and flows in isolating that variable. So, let's
Mm.
say we're talking about happiness or fear.
Yep.
What level situation prompts that amount of response? And if we find that anxiety, what you mentioned, hey,
Mm.
I find that almost all of my actions, all of my conversations, all of my undone to dos, all of the things that come across my desk cause some amount of anxiety.
Mm.
Cool. What is the smallest thing that causes anxiety? Cool. Can we resolve that? Cool.
Yep.
So that would be like the behavior change for the individual after building that relationship. On the other side, that idea of like isolating the variable and finding like at what points do I have some level of association with what makes you feel some kind of way?
Mm.
Maybe your level of anxiety about meeting with fucking, I don't know, like a new consult is
Mm.
what the level of anxiety is for me about opening my inbox after I've been away for several days.
Yep.
For some people, they're like, dude, give me all the consults in the world. Like, I just want to make money. But they might also find that, like, on the other side, they're like, don't bog down my day with emails and interactions that don't have any quantifiable positive ROI. So, like,
Mm.
but if we find that, like, at some point we can build some amount of mental reciprocity, or really, it's not both of us. At this point, like, it could
Mm.
be just the coach or just the individual trying to, like, communicate and connect at a higher level. If you can figure out like this level of thing is where we both feel this kind of emotion, now I get a sense of when Lisa says anxious, what is that?
Mm. Yeah. What does
And
that feel?
so, for me, a big piece is my relationship with Vanessa.
Mm.
Anxiety is a big, consistent feeling and emotion for her. And there's a lot of things that trigger a very high level of anxiety that just aren't even on my fucking radar whatsoever.
Mm. Yep.
And so that doesn't make it helpful for me to try to problem solve. Also, that's a
Mm.
whole thing we can talk about is like, you don't always have to coach people. Some people just want
Yep.
to be heard, stupid. Um, that's me talking to myself.
That's yep.
But if I can get her to name that she is feeling anxiety, I can think about like, all right, well, what would this situation present to as me having to think about it and manage it if it was making me anxious?
Mm.
Like, I know what it's like to have to manage this thing that is a problem in this moment, but I don't know how I would manage it if I felt the kind of way that I would feel if one of my anxiety triggers was going off.
Yep.
Like, how would I respond to this situation if while this thing that was happening that didn't bother me but bothered Vanessa a lot, me a little,
Mm.
what if this same situation was happening while I was getting a phone call and Liam was yelling and the dogs were barking?
Yeah. Like,
Oh
mm.
shit, like now I know why this is a
Thing.
very deep amber DEFCON level. I think that's like 4 when it gets orange, it's not quite red.
Yeah.
I think
It's
that's 5, but fucking could be just pulling that out of my ass.
no.
But it helps me associate like, hey, like we're talking about just coordinating like Liam getting picked up or dropped off to school with like
Mm.
you, me, and your parents. There's like no less than 3 vehicles and 4 parties involved. It's fine. But
Yep.
if I was trying to coordinate this logistically while my anxiety triggers really high, I'd be like, oh,
Overwhelming.
we don't need
Yep.
to actually solve this problem at all. I need to help bring things in more alignment. I know that more alignment isn't me getting mad about you not
No.
being receptive to it. So, like, now
Mm-mm.
we're both anxious and stressed. Let's try to fucking solve problems. Instead, you're
No.
like, hey, here's, are you feeling what? Anxiety? Cool. How do we resolve anxiety? We make the unknown and we make it known, and then we problem solve for what's known, and it becomes way less stressful and overwhelming.
Yep.
Let's talk about it. Like,
Yep.
let's talk about it in a way that isn't solving the problem, but let's talk about it in a way that is specific to creating a better emotional state.
Mm.
And it isn't generally that you go there first. And so this is what
No.
brings us full circle and all of it. Often, if you can get the emotion labeled or named, then you have your in for vulnerability in a way that serves the purpose.
Yep.
Because you're not just like opening yourself up to open yourself up to bitch about your shit. And I think that's
Yeah.
another thing that we struggle with as coaches a lot because you also don't want to be that client. It's like, dude, you are the oversharer that cannibalizes all of my time
Yeah.
and energy and mental bandwidth. Like, don't just come at me with a fucking litany of problems, which is often how a lot
Yeah.
of people's vulnerabilities are framed, is a big spewing narrative of like victimhood. And then you're like,
Yes.
we got to strip away a lot of shit. So, like, how did it actually make you
Let's
feel?
start. Yep.
Then we can probably get there.
Yep.
How did it make you feel? Cool. When did you start feeling that way? What was the thing that
Yeah.
you first noticed that feeling coming from? Anyway, so back to where we're at in the story. Wifey, super anxious about a thing that isn't really anxiety producing to me, but it allows me to think about a better frame of reference for our communication so that I can think about my own vulnerability, explain her, be like, dude, I don't know how you feel about this specific situation, but I know that when the phone's ringing, the dogs are barking, Liam's screaming, and I'm trying to like get a flight booked, I want to tear heads off and burn the house down. Is that
Yeah.
kind of how you feel right now? Then she's like, yes,
Yes.
you get it. You
Yep.
understand. Cool. If we're in that alignment of understanding what somebody is feeling, then we're in a place where they create the openness for working on like the logical, rational shit.
Mm.
But
And that
until
was one
we cross that bridge,
you can't get there. It's and
well,
that
like,
was
what do
the big
people want? Like, people don't want to be heard; they want to be understood.
yeah, and that was, that was very early on in my, um, coaching journey with you guys was I would say to people, I can't explain the relationship we have, but they don't just care about Lisa, the gym owner, they actually care about Lisa, the person. Like they see me clearer than I see me at times. And that was the big kicker. I went, that's why, people say, "What'd you talk about today?" I said, "Well, it was all about me, actually, not about to dos for the business. It was to dos for me." But it's like having that, knowing that it was understood, that you didn't feel like you were insane or crazy or, just narcissistic for feeling the way that you felt. Like it's like yes, we, can relate to that and understand that without having lived that exact scenario. So that was a big thing that allowed me to then just, cut away the bullshit and bravado and just be whoever I was each week that turned up on the call. And
How
that's a
quickly does
powerful
that
thing.
become self-reinforcing?
Oh, really quickly.
Dude, how good does it
Yep.
feel to not have to have your guard up? How good does it feel to just say
Yep.
what you mean and mean what you say? And so that
Oh,
would be the
totally.
encouragement is get to a place where you can be okay leaning into all the stuff that you generally shy away from, and not only will the quality of your communication, your connections be better, you'll be way more confident.
Yeah,
Like,
for
you think
sure.
about
And
have you ever seen I don't know if this is an international thing, but I would imagine it is because I would venture to guess you're familiar with Eminem,
yep.
the lyricist or the rapper.
Yes.
And so you may have heard of a film titled 8 Mile.
Yes.
Have you
Yes.
seen it?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the last rap battle?
Yes.
Do you remember the beginning? And I won't, like, make you rap it
Oh,
but,
yeah.
like, the general construct.
Mm,
He goes through, I wanna say, like, 14 to 16 lines, don't quote me
mm,
on it, but it
mm,
is a significant amount of what is a damning admission. It
mm.
is putting it all out there in plain view. He's like, this thing happened, this is what I'm bad at, here's, like, all
Yep.
my like, just bleh,
Yep.
cool. What are you gonna talk about?
Yep.
The reflection, this is really powerful. This is actually one of probably the most helpful things that I've gone through in thinking about this is that connection to adolescence where earlier in life that would all be very easily weaponized against you.
Mm.
But if you sit into a reasonable adult construct where you realize that often we're just healing our inner child and trying to learn skills to navigate life in a better way, and like how you feel is a lie to a degree, and it's a lot of
Mm.
stories that we tell ourselves like we can still get triggered, we can still feel the thing, but it's for sure way less impactful than when you were like, a 14-year-old girl crying in the back of class.
Yep.
um but in adult relationships there are far less paths that are less damning and damaging because of that idea of social credit, I guess, to a large
Mm.
degree. At 14, like everybody rips on everybody, and there's not really a whole lot of consequence, which is why it's so prevalent. But if you're 38 and you tell somebody something that is associatable that you have at least wrapped your head around, I guess there's three options, right? Like they can
Mm.
either lean into it and connect, they can lean away and disconnect, or they could like do some fucking dumb malicious shit. But in the idea of social credit, what does that mean for that bridge that exists between the two of you? And also, of what level is any of that increasing their social credit and status with other people? Because for most people, they're okay talking a little bit of shit or like a
Yeah.
little bit of rumors and hearsay and like nonsense gossip. But if you told somebody like a really vulnerable piece, they'd be like, dude, that feels yucky that you shared that with me. Like,
Yeah.
I don't what do you want me to do with this? Why are you even
Yep.
giving it to me? And so, like, I think that that's maybe potentially a safeguard for people that are wondering, like, is it okay to share stuff? I don't know, fucking try it and find out because that's the only way
Yeah.
anything happens. But at least in my head at this point, like from our conversation, I think those are really the three options. Either
Mm.
like you go with it, you don't do anything with it, or you do
Mm.
something like that would be unfortunate with it. And if people are like, oh, they might still do that thing,
Mm.
like, cool, well, what is really the consequence?
Yep.
And,
I
like, more
mean,
often than not, you'd be like, probably not that big of a deal. And if it
no.
is a thing that there would be an enormous amount of consequence in, then, like, fuck, I don't know. I don't have something, like, relatable in that. Uh,
Yeah.
maybe if you're like, well, I told him I killed a guy and nobody else knew that, then, like, that's probably a little bit different than what we're talking about.
For
So
sure.
I don't know.
It's you learn as whether it's like an inherent skill that you have or a learned skill, I guess, over time, you actually learn to read a situation and people to know when you might be able to share, and you don't always get it right. Um, but then you start to figure out. your radar, I guess, for being able to find the right time and the right place and the right people to share something with gets a little better. And
Yeah,
you kind of
I think an
are already
important.
pre-filtering people through previous conversations you've had, whether this is the time. So, like when I went through my journey of coming out to a degree, is who are the right people that you tell, and what is you're not going to just necessarily walk down the street and go, "Hey, bitches, this is me."
I
It's
mean, for some people, that's
it
that's where they
is,
find it.
but for me, it was a lot of individual conversations with people, and like, I was very selective with people because, who I had already know that we had that level of relationship with. And there were some people I shared with, which I thought, wow, I didn't realize I'd have that conversation with that person. But it was just in that moment and it turned out really well versus, you know, people who you've been around life for a really long time with. And then you say, hey, by the way, and they're like, oh, okay. And you're like, oh, that's that. And straight away, then you go, okay, that's not the level of our relationship that I thought we were at. But thanks.
Right, and so, like, those
And
3 options end up extending back the other direction because somebody is forced to, like,
yep,
not to a point of full closure or conclusion, but, like, to a degree, they have to, like, show their hand of cards, so to speak.
yes,
Like, I took
yep,
the chance, I did the thing.
yep,
What am I getting, or where is this going, or how is it being received?
yep.
Cool. Wasn't the answer that I wanted or what I had hoped for, but, like, expectations and reality do their shit, so whatever,
Mhm,
but did I learn something about myself? Did I learn something about this person? Did I learn something about the relationship? And, like, do I have a way to, like, step further into the direction of where I want to go?
yep,
Um, it might have also been before we jumped on that we were talking about big picture goals, or
yep.
was that early on today?
Could have been before we jumped on about,
I think it was before we jumped on. And
yeah,
so, in thinking about bigger, more aspirational goals, think about the idealized version of yourself that you would have to be in order for those goals to come true,
mm,
and think about what level of confidence and security that would necessitate. And then think about what things you would have to let go of to get there, and
mm,
what kind of quality conversations you would have be what kind of quality conversations you would have to be able to have to get
mm,
there. And so
yep,
that helps you screen kind of all the things. Is this moving me further towards this kind of like idealized long-term vision of what I have for myself, my identity, my life, my relationships, my friendships, my associates, how I speak about myself, how I think about myself, what I allow into my bandwidth? Or
mm,
from this otherwise like neutral baseline, does this interaction, does this piece drag me further towards the hell that
mm,
is, like, basically just not growing past this uncomfortable thing?
yep,
I didn't talk about my DUI very openly for a long time because there was a lot of, like, shame and embarrassment around it, and then when you
mm,
start talking about it a bunch, you realize, like, the people that the people that mind don't matter,
yep. And the
and
and the people who matter,
the alternative of that is the people that mind don't matter, and the people that don't mind are the ones that matter or some shit. But
yeah,
you also find out, like,
it's
dude, a
true.
ton of people have DUIs, like, not actually
Mm,
as big of a deal in your head as it is in reality, not as uncommon, and the feelings and emotions are often the same. And so, like, if we could tackle those, they go away by
mm,
shining light on them. And so that's really kind of like the thing is, if you think about these two pieces, we need constructs of both heaven and hell in order to make better decisions and create better behaviors. And so, is not resolving this vulnerability, is not dealing with this thing a piece that keeps me trapped in it longer, or is it an inevitable piece that I will have to resolve in order to have the life that I want to have?
yeah, it's yeah, when you think about it like that and you put those pieces together, you're like, it becomes very easy then to figure out who create that identity of who you wanna be to get there.
Yeah, well, and it helps you, like,
Yeah.
curate shit too. It's like, if you talk about something
Yeah.
yucky or uncomfortable for you and somebody takes, like, the road that you had not hoped that they would take with that piece of
Yeah.
connection, that opportunity for empathy, that opportunity for relatability, and just like, dude,
Mm.
I am inviting you into a safe space. And most people, and maybe like this is the negative bias that we always end up coming to, is like most people end up being very fucking happy to have an open, comfortable, connected place to talk about themselves.
Mm.
And so that's really like the great mind fuck of all of it, is leaning into a tiny bit of your own vulnerability creates an opportunity to get the spotlight actually entirely back off of you.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
always, but I would say in the overwhelming majority of uncomfortable conversations that you have ever had, or anybody that listens to it has ever had, if you, as soon as you pull your dick out, so to speak,
Mm.
like, everybody's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, but mine is, like, way bigger and cooler and, like, longer," or, like, "Look how more mangled mine is." It's like
Yeah.
they will find some way to
Yeah.
generally turn it into a thing that ends up being more about them, or if it is more like the relationship that we have as coaches and clients, and, like, the
Mm.
relationship we have together, if you have a situation that makes you feel some kind of way that I can label that emotion, I can bridge to you that, like, here's how I know what you're feeling. It's not the same situation, but like X, Y, and Z
Mm.
happen. I feel this kind of way. I describe that feeling back to you in some kind of way that's pretty coherent.
Mm.
Um, and then all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, you know
Yeah.
exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Here's where it creates benefit for the other person and you, is they will often, if they don't use that opportunity to talk about themselves, they will use you as a tool, as an avatar for their own mental models of like, well, how do you think about this? How do you deal with
Mm.
this? And then it's just telling fucking stories. And it
Yeah.
could be that, like, oh yeah, dude, that also, like, maybe they ask you, like, how do you deal with X, Y, and Z in that? You're like, okay,
Mm.
actually, it just makes me feel way worse than I already do. And they're like,
Yeah.
cool. You
Yeah.
understand it more. Or you're like, oh, well, X, Y, and Z, I feel this kind of way, but I do this kind of thing and it gets better. And they're like, holy shit, that's helpful
Mm.
for me. And so at that point, when there is a bridged conversation over some element of like shared emotion that we can expose through being vulnerable and then also building a story to bridge it,
Mm.
the conversation is beneficial no matter what, because either you're building more awareness and helping to work through your own shit that triggers those same emotions that are negative, otherwise why the fuck would we be talking about them, or they're positive and so like, hey, we can chase more of them,
Mm.
but it's good for the other person. So like that builds a better relationship because reciprocity exists on both ends. If I'm learning more about myself and you're like, well, what makes you super happy with, Vanessa, Liam, the dogs, your
Mm.
clients, business, and I'm building all these like positive associations, like I have good shit to do with that, then you could also be like, hey, when I'm feeling down, maybe these are some tactics, tools, strategies that I can apply in my life, in my own context. Or like, fuck, you just gave me like a giant hype session where I'm like, yeah, dude, all this shit makes me super happy.
Yeah.
I don't
And
know,
you.
dude, being vulnerable, it's like it's better than the alternative. And maybe
Yeah.
that is the simple thing that we can kind of close out on is I work to, in my brain, despite knowing that life is very, very much so not binary,
Mm.
being able to assign a binary construct to think about which direction to err in our decisions is something that I find helpful. And so if I think, if I'm going to overshare, what does that look like? What does that feel like? What type of life does that create? Versus what if I just don't share anything whatsoever at all? And then
Mm.
can I find some examples on either side? Well, there's no shortage of people that I can think about that I know firsthand experience that don't ever
Mm.
share anything vulnerable at all.
Mm.
And they all lead awful lives of miserable desperation universally.
Yep.
'Cause I can't think of a single person that doesn't like get into some real talk or some feels that has
Yep.
a life that I'd want any part of whatsoever. So, what does the other side of that extreme look like?
Mm.
Fucking probably like professional YouTubers that they're like,
Yeah.
here's all my shit all
Here's
day,
everything.
every
Yeah.
day. Here's what's happening. Here's what I'm thinking and feeling about it. And does it seem like that generally works out more in favor of the alternative? Yeah.
Yep.
Even if they don't get a bunch of fucking likes and views and ad revenue or like blow up, they're at
Yep.
least talking through their shit. So, as we endlessly reference, they're at least understanding their own thinking better.
Yep.
That's the
And
worst case
evolving
scenario.
it. Yeah. And once you evolve those thought process, it just makes it easier for you to even self-manage some of the things that you feel when you can talk through that even out loud to yourself to a screen. It's like, it's actually okay. I'm not.
Yeah, like, I think we both said often, like, shame only exists in the dark.
Yep, that's right.
And there's so much that we fear in these opportunities of being vulnerable, but the vulnerability is what absolves us of the exact thing that we're afraid of.
Yep.
When you're
And that
feeling fear and insecurity and you communicate it to somebody and they're like, "Oh yeah, me too." All of a sudden you're like, "Oh,
yeah, it's
huh,
yeah, I'm not alone in the dark anymore. There's a
okay."
yeah.
Um, no man, I
Yeah,
think that like that's
I think that's a good note to, dot point. There's so many layers to this, and even I thought going in, like, the reference I had was coaches, parents, you know, leaders, friends. There's so many layers to this. Like, we've really touched on how it affects a coaching relationship, but there's so much we can do, as partners. So we will get back to this and loop
yeah,
back
and I
around
think that, like,
to
that's
talk
an
about the other
important, like,
layers of this.
construct is that, like, coaching is nothing more than believing in somebody and wanting more for them
Mm,
and trying to be a helpful human and getting them across that gap.
yeah. More so than they want for themselves or believe in themselves. Transfer of belief. I've heard that a lot recently.
Weird.
Perfect note to end. Thank you, sir. Love this chat. One of our best, I think, and definitely one of the most useful. But I'm grateful for your vulnerability every week in getting your stories out there and showing the world it's okay to be an awesome human.
Working on it.
Yeah, you certainly are. All right, my friend. We'll talk
Thank you.
soon.
Thank you so much for listening to another conversation with Chuck Bennington. Hope it was enjoyable for you. Hope there was some value and some benefit in it. Maybe even had a laugh or two. Even though these are primarily for me and Liam, we sure love to help a friend in need because it's a friend indeed. So if there was some piece of it that was good, please feel free to share it with somebody else and pay it forward. If you think what we're doing is rad and you want to support it, please just like, subscribe, share, tell a friend. Appreciate you, dudes.